President Ibrahim Traoré sat behind his massive wooden desk in the presidential palace, reviewing the morning briefings that his staff had prepared. At 34 years old, he was one of Africa's youngest leaders, having come to power through a military coup just 2 years earlier. His rise to leadership had been dramatic and swift, but he was still learning how to navigate the complex world of international business and economic development. The folder that caught his attention was marked Major Industrial Projects Confidential. Inside was a detailed report about Aminata Kone and her plans for a massive rice processing facility. Traoré had heard whispers about this project, but this was the first time he was seeing the full scope of what she intended to build. The numbers were impressive. The factory would process over 500,000 tons of rice annually, making it larger than any similar facility in West Africa. It would create 3,000 direct jobs and support thousands more indirect jobs throughout the supply chain. The investment would bring advanced technology to Burkina Faso and position the country as a major player in the regional rice market. But what struck Traoré most was not the size of the project, but the person behind it. Here was a Burkinabe woman who had built a business empire from nothing, using her own intelligence and determination. This was exactly the kind of success story that his administration wanted to promote. He had come to power promising to transform Burkina Faso's economy and reduce dependence on foreign aid. Aminata's project seemed to embody those goals perfectly. However, Traoré also felt a nagging concern. He had been burned before by big promises from business leaders who talked about massive investments but delivered very little. In his 2 years as president, he had seen too many projects that looked good on paper but fell apart when it came time to actually build something real. He needed to be sure that Aminata Kone was different. The president called his chief economic advisor, Dr. Ousmane Sawadogo, into his office. Sawadogo was a Harvard-educated economist who had returned to Burkina Faso specifically to work with the new administration. He had been tracking Aminata's project for months and had strong opinions about its potential. "What do you really think about this rice factory project?" Traoré asked, sliding the folder across his desk. Sawadogo had been waiting for this conversation. "Mr. President, this could be transformational for our agricultural sector, but we need to be careful about how we handle it. Aminata Kone is not like other business leaders we've dealt with. She's built her success slowly and carefully, without taking shortcuts or making unrealistic promises." The advisor pulled out his own thick file on Aminata's business history. He had done extensive research on her background, interviewing farmers who had worked with her, checking her financial records, and even visiting her warehouses unannounced. Everything he found impressed him. She pays her suppliers on time, she maintains high-quality standards, and she's never defaulted on a loan. Sawadogo continued. More importantly, she understands the rice market better than anyone in West Africa. She's not just another entrepreneur looking to make quick money. She's building something that can last. Traoré was intrigued, but he wanted to meet this remarkable woman himself. He instructed his staff to arrange a private meeting with Aminata, away from the media attention that would surely follow if word leaked about a presidential meeting with the country's most ambitious female entrepreneur. Meanwhile, Aminata was facing challenges of her own. Word about her project had spread faster than she expected, and not everyone was happy about her plans. Some of the country's established business elite, mostly older men who had dominated the agricultural sector for decades, saw her factory as a threat to their own interests. These men had built their wealth through connections rather than innovation. They imported rice from Asia and sold it at high prices, making enormous profits while local farmers struggled to compete. Aminata's factory would change this dynamic completely. By processing local rice to international standards, she would help domestic farmers compete directly with imports. The resistance came in subtle but frustrating ways. Suddenly, permits that should have been routine were delayed for weeks. Government officials who had previously been helpful became evasive. Suppliers who had committed to providing equipment began backing out of contracts, citing pressure from unnamed sources. But Aminata had dealt with obstacles her entire career. She had learned to be patient and persistent, finding alternative solutions when direct approaches were blocked. When one equipment supplier backed out, she found another. When permits were delayed, she hired additional legal help and worked through the bureaucracy step by step. Her breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Marie, her loyal assistant, had a cousin who worked as a cleaner in the presidential palace. Through casual conversations, this cousin had overheard discussions about Aminata's project at the highest levels of government. The word was that President Traoré himself was interested in meeting with her. When the official invitation arrived, Aminata was both excited and nervous. She had never met with a head of state before, and she understood that this meeting could determine the future of her entire project. If she could win presidential support, the obstacles she was facing would likely disappear. But if the meeting went poorly, her dreams of building Africa's largest rice factory might never become reality. Aminata spent days preparing for the meeting. She studied President Traoré's background, his policy priorities, and his vision for Burkina Faso's economic development. She prepared detailed presentations showing how her factory would contribute to national food security, job creation, and export earnings. She also researched successful agricultural projects in other African countries, looking for examples that might resonate with the young president. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the presidential palace. Aminata arrived 30 minutes early, wearing her best business suit and carrying a leather briefcase containing her presentation materials. The palace guards checked her identification multiple times before escorting her through the ornate hallways, lined with portraits of previous presidents. As she waited in the reception area, Aminata reflected on how far she had come from her humble beginnings in Bobo-Dioulasso. 24 years ago, she had been a village girl with big dreams and no money. Now she was about to meet with the president of her country to discuss a project that could transform the entire agricultural sector. Dr. Sawadogo came out to greet her personally, which she took as a positive sign. He led her into the president's office where Traoré was standing behind his desk, looking younger than she had expected but carrying himself with unmistakable authority. "Madame Cohn," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile, "I've been looking forward to this meeting. Please have a seat and tell me about this remarkable project of yours." Aminata opened her briefcase with steady hands, though her heart was racing. She had practiced this presentation dozens of times, but sitting across from the president of her country made everything feel different. The office was impressive, with traditional African art mixed with modern furniture, creating an atmosphere that was both welcoming and powerful. "Mr. President," she began, her voice clear and confident, "what I'm about to show you isn't just a business proposal. It's a vision for how Burkina Faso can become the rice capital of West Africa." She spread out detailed architectural drawings of the proposed factory across the president's desk. The facility was massive, covering over 50 acres with multiple processing buildings, storage silos, and administrative offices. But what impressed Traoré most were the numbers that Aminata presented with such precision and confidence. "This factory will process 500,000 tons of rice annually," she explained, pointing to different sections of the blueprints. "That's enough to meet 60% of our country's rice consumption, plus produce a surplus for export to neighboring countries. Right now, we import 200,000 tons of rice every year, sending millions of dollars to Asian countries that could be staying right here in Burkina Faso." President Traoré leaned forward, studying the drawings carefully. He had seen many business presentations since taking office, but none with this level of detail and strategic thinking. "Tell me about the technology you're planning to use," he said. Aminata's eyes lit up. This was the part of her project she was most excited about. "We'll be using the same advanced processing equipment that they use in Thailand and Vietnam, but we're adapting it specifically for African rice varieties. Our engineers have spent 2 years studying how to get the best results from the types of rice that grow well in our climate." She pulled out photographs from her recent trips to Asia, showing massive processing lines where raw rice entered one end and perfectly packaged premium rice emerged from the other. "The key is controlling every step of the process: cleaning, hulling, polishing, sorting, and packaging. With this technology, rice grown by a farmer in Bobo-Dioulasso will have the same quality as rice imported from Thailand, but at a much lower cost." Dr. Sawadogo, who had been listening quietly, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "What about financing? This looks like a very expensive project." Aminata had been expecting this question. She turned to a new section of her presentation, filled with financial projections and funding sources. "The total investment will be $52 million. I've already secured commitments for $38 million from private investors and development banks." The remaining $14 million will come from a combination of bank loans and strategic partners. What she didn't mention was how difficult it had been to secure that funding. Many potential investors had been skeptical about putting so much money into a project led by an African woman in one of the world's poorest countries. She had been turned down by dozens of banks and investment firms before finding the ones that believed in her vision. President Traoré was impressed by the financial planning, but he wanted to understand the broader impact. How many jobs will this create? Direct employment will be about 3,000 people, Aminata replied, but the indirect impact will be much larger. We estimate that the factory will support 15,000 additional jobs throughout the supply chain: farmers, truck drivers, equipment technicians, and service providers. Plus, by helping local farmers get better prices for their rice, we'll be supporting thousands of rural families. She showed him maps indicating where the rice would come from, not just Burkina Faso, but also Mali, Niger, and Ghana. The factory would become a regional hub, processing rice from across West Africa and distributing finished products throughout the continent. There's another benefit that I think you'll find particularly interesting, Mr. President, Aminata continued. This factory will help us achieve food security. Right now, when there's a global rice shortage or price increase, our people suffer because we depend on imports. With our own processing capacity, we can build strategic reserves and protect our population from external food crises. This point resonated strongly with Traoré. Food security had been a major concern during his time in office, especially as climate change made weather patterns more unpredictable. The ability to process and store large quantities of locally grown rice would give Burkina Faso much more control over its food supply. The meeting continued for over 2 hours, with Aminata answering detailed questions about everything from environmental impact to export potential. She had clearly done her homework, providing specific answers backed up with research and data. By the end of the presentation, President Traoré was convinced that this project could be a game changer for his country's economy. But there was one more issue that needed to be addressed. Madam Cohn, the president said, I have to ask about the challenges you've been facing. My staff tells me that some people in the business community are not supportive of your project. Aminata had been hoping this topic wouldn't come up, but she was prepared to address it honestly. Mr. President, there are some established business leaders who benefit from the current system where we import most of our rice. They make large profits as middlemen, and they see my factory as a threat to those profits. Some of them have tried to create obstacles for my project. She described the permit delays, the suppliers who had backed out under pressure, and the subtle campaign of discouragement that she had been facing. But she also emphasized that she had found ways to overcome each obstacle, demonstrating the kind of persistence that had driven her success throughout her career. Traoré exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Sawadogo. They both understood the dynamics at play. The old guard of Burkina Faso's business establishment was resistant to change, especially when that change was being led by a woman who hadn't come from a wealthy family or powerful connections. What kind of support would you need from the government? The president asked. Aminata had thought carefully about this question. She didn't want to appear to be asking for handouts or special treatment. Mr. President, I'm not asking for financial support from the government. What I need is a level playing field, fair treatment in the permit process, protection from unfair business practices, and perhaps some help with infrastructure like road access to the factory site. She also mentioned that tax incentives for agricultural processing, similar to those offered in other African countries, would help make the project more competitive internationally. But she emphasized that her primary request was simply for the government to remove artificial barriers that were being created by her competitors. President Traoré made his decision quickly. This was exactly the kind of project his administration wanted to support: innovative, job-creating, and led by a Burkinabe entrepreneur rather than foreign investors. Madam Cohn, you have my full support. I'm going to assign Dr. Sawadogo to work directly with you to ensure that all government processes move smoothly, and I want to announce this project publicly so that everyone understands that it has presidential backing. Aminata felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over her. After months of fighting through obstacles and skepticism, she finally had the support she needed to move forward with confidence. But she also understood that presidential support came with expectations. She would need to deliver on every promise she had made during this meeting. As the meeting concluded, President Traoré stood up and shook her hand firmly. "Madam Cohn, what you're building will be remembered as a turning point for our country. Make sure you build it well." The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Ouagadougou as Aminata Kone stepped out of her modest Toyota Corolla. At 42 years old, she had the quiet confidence of someone who had fought hard for everything she owned. Her clothes were simple but clean, a colorful West African dress that had seen better days, and worn leather sandals that clicked softly against the concrete as she walked toward the small office building. Few people in Burkina Faso knew that this unassuming woman was about to become one of Africa's most powerful business people. Aminata had spent the last 15 years building her empire from nothing, starting with a tiny rice trading business that she ran from her kitchen table. Now she was ready to make the biggest move of her life. Inside the cramped office, her assistant Marie was already sorting through stacks of papers. The walls were covered with maps of West Africa, charts showing rice production numbers and photographs of rice fields from across the continent. This wasn't just any business office. It was the headquarters of what would soon become a revolution in African agriculture. Aminata had grown up in a farming family in the rural village of Bobo Dioulasso. Her father grew rice on a small plot of land, barely making enough money to feed his 8 children. She remembered the years when the rains didn't come, and how her family would eat only 1 meal a day to make their food last longer. Those hungry nights had shaped her in ways that would drive her for the rest of her life. When she was 18, Aminata moved to the capital city with nothing but a cloth bag full of clothes and big dreams. She worked as a cleaner in office buildings during the day and sold rice door to door in the evenings. The rice came from her father's farm and other small farmers in her village. She would buy it cheap and sell it in the city for a small profit. What made Aminata different from other small traders was her sharp mind for numbers and her ability to see patterns that others missed. She noticed that rice prices went up and down in predictable cycles. When other traders were buying high, she would wait. When they were selling low, she would stock up. Within 5 years, she had saved enough money to rent a small warehouse. Her warehouse business grew steadily. She began buying rice not just from her home village, but from farmers across Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. She learned to speak multiple local languages and built relationships with farmers who trusted her to give them fair prices. Unlike many other traders who tried to cheat farmers, Aminata always kept her word. This earned her a reputation that spread across the region. By the time she was 35, Aminata owned 3 warehouses and a small fleet of trucks. She was importing rice from Asia and selling it across West Africa, but she had a bigger vision that kept her awake at night. She wanted to build something that would change the entire rice industry in Africa. The idea came to her during a trip to Thailand, where she visited massive rice processing facilities that could handle millions of tons of rice every year. She saw machines that could clean, sort, and package rice with incredible efficiency. She watched as trucks loaded with raw rice went in one end of the factory, and perfectly packaged bags of premium rice came out the other end. Standing in that Thai factory, Aminata made a decision that would change everything. She was going to build the biggest rice processing facility in Africa. Right in her home country of Burkina Faso, it would be a place where African farmers could bring their rice and get the same world-class processing that was available in Asia. The factory would create thousands of jobs and help African rice compete with imports from other continents. When she returned to Burkina Faso, Aminata began working on her plan in secret. She knew that if word got out too early, competitors might try to stop her or the government might create obstacles. She spent months studying factory designs, meeting with engineers, and calculating costs. The numbers were staggering. She would need over $50 million to build the factory of her dreams. Most people would have given up at this point, but Aminata had learned to think differently about problems. Instead of seeing $50 million as an impossible amount, she broke it down into smaller pieces. She would need investors, bank loans, and government support. She began reaching out to contacts she had built over the years in the rice business. Her first breakthrough came when she met with a group of investors from Ghana who were looking for opportunities in West Africa. They were impressed by her knowledge of the rice market and her track record of success. After months of negotiations, they agreed to provide $20 million in exchange for a stake in the company. The second piece of funding came from an unexpected source. The World Bank had a program to support large-scale agricultural projects in developing countries. Aminata spent weeks preparing her application, creating detailed business plans and environmental impact studies. When she finally submitted her proposal, it was over 200 pages long. While she waited for responses from investors and lenders, Aminata began scouting locations for her factory. She needed a place with good road access, reliable electricity, and enough space for the massive facility she had in mind. After visiting dozens of potential sites, she found the perfect location on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The land was owned by a local chief who was skeptical about selling to a woman. In many parts of Burkina Faso, women weren't expected to own large businesses or make major deals. But Aminata had faced this kind of doubt her entire life. She met with the chief several times, bringing gifts and showing respect for local customs. Eventually, she convinced him that her factory would bring prosperity to the entire community. As news of her project began to spread, Aminata started attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Government officials wanted to meet with her. Journalists began asking questions. Other business leaders, mostly men, started taking notice of the woman who was planning to build the biggest rice factory in Africa. But the most important attention was yet to come. Word of her ambitious project had reached the highest levels of government, including President Ibrahim Traoré himself. 3 months after her meeting with President Traoré, Aminata stood at the edge of what would soon become the construction site for Africa's largest rice processing facility. The morning air was crisp, and she could hear the sounds of heavy machinery being unloaded from trucks in the distance. Today was groundbreaking day, and everything she had worked toward for the past decade was about to become reality. The transformation in her circumstances since gaining presidential support had been remarkable. Permits that had been delayed for months were suddenly approved within days. Government officials who had previously been difficult to reach were now calling her office to offer assistance. The business establishment that had tried to block her project now found themselves isolated, unable to continue their campaign against a venture that had clear backing from the highest levels of government. But the changes went beyond just bureaucratic efficiency. Word of presidential support had attracted new investors and partners who wanted to be associated with such a high-profile success story. A major European equipment manufacturer, which had previously been hesitant to work with an African woman entrepreneur, suddenly became very interested in providing financing for their machinery. An international development bank increased their loan commitment by $20 million, citing the project's strategic importance and strong government backing. Aminata had used this momentum to accelerate every aspect of the project. She hired the best construction company in West Africa, brought in technical experts from Thailand and India, and established partnerships with farmer cooperatives across the region. The factory that had once existed only in her dreams and blueprints was now becoming a massive construction project that would employ over 800 people during the building phase alone. The groundbreaking ceremony was designed to send a clear message about the project's importance. President Traoré himself would speak at the event, along with representatives from major international organizations. Media from across Africa would be present to document this historic moment. For Aminata, it was a chance to show the world that African women could lead transformational projects that competed with anything being built anywhere else in the world. As guests began arriving for the ceremony, Aminata reflected on all the people who had helped make this moment possible. Her father, who had taught her the rice business on his small farm in Bobo-Dioulasso, was there with tears of pride in his eyes. Marie, her faithful assistant who had been with her through every challenge of the past 15 years, was coordinating the media coverage with professional efficiency. Dr. Sawadogo, who had become not just a government liaison, but a trusted advisor, was making sure that every detail of the event proceeded smoothly. But perhaps most meaningful to Aminata were the hundreds of rice farmers who had traveled from across West Africa to witness the groundbreaking. These were the people who would benefit most from the factory. Small-scale farmers who had struggled for generations to get fair prices for their crops. With the new processing facility, They would be able to sell directly to a modern operation that could turn their raw rice into premium products for regional and international markets. When President Traoré arrived, the crowd of over 2,000 people erupted in cheers. He was accompanied by ministers from several neighboring countries, demonstrating the regional significance of the project. Ghana's Minister of Agriculture was there, along with representatives from Mali and Niger. They understood that this factory would create opportunities for farmers throughout West Africa, not just in Burkina Faso. The president's speech was powerful and direct. "Today we are witnessing something historic," he declared, his voice carrying across the construction site through a professional sound system. Aminata Kone represents the best of what is possible when African entrepreneurs are given the support they need to dream big and build something transformational. He spoke about how the factory would reduce Burkina Faso's dependence on food imports, create thousands of jobs, and position the country as a leader in agricultural processing. But he also used the occasion to send a broader message about his administration's commitment to supporting innovative businesses, especially those led by women and young people. "This project shows the world that Africa doesn't just have to be a source of raw materials," Traoré continued. "We can process our own resources, add value to our own products, and compete in global markets with the best that anyone has to offer." When it was Aminata's turn to speak, she felt the weight of the moment. She had never addressed such a large crowd, and she was aware that her words would be reported across Africa and beyond. She spoke from the heart about her journey from a village girl, selling rice door to door, to the CEO of a company about to build the continent's most advanced agricultural processing facility. "This factory belongs to all of us," she said, gesturing toward the farmers in the crowd. "It belongs to every person who believed that Africa could do better, that we could build our own industries and create our own prosperity. Today we break ground not just for a building, but for a new future where African farmers control their own destiny." The ceremonial groundbreaking itself was conducted with golden shovels that had been specially made for the occasion. President Traoré took the first symbolic scoop of earth, followed by Aminata, and then representatives from each of the partner organizations. As photographers captured every moment, the crowd cheered with genuine excitement about what was being launched. But behind the celebration, Aminata was already focused on the massive challenges that lay ahead. Building a $52 million facility in 18 months would require flawless execution of thousands of complex tasks. She had hired a South African project management company with experience in large-scale industrial construction, but she knew that she would need to be personally involved in every major decision. The first major challenge would be preparing the construction site. The land needed to be leveled and graded to precise specifications to support the heavy machinery that would be installed. Roads needed to be built to handle the constant flow of construction vehicles and, eventually, the trucks that would bring raw rice and take away finished products. Electrical infrastructure had to be upgraded to provide the massive amount of power that the processing equipment would require. Aminata had already identified the key personnel who would manage different aspects of the construction. Her operations director was a Nigerian engineer who had previously built rice processing facilities in Ghana and Ivory Coast. Her quality control manager was a Thai expert who understood exactly how to adapt Asian rice processing technology for African conditions. Her logistics coordinator was a local woman who knew every road and bridge in West Africa and could ensure efficient transportation of raw materials and finished products. The equipment procurement process was particularly complex. The main processing machinery was being manufactured in Italy and Thailand, requiring precise coordination between suppliers on different continents. Some of the specialized components had lead times of over 12 months, which meant that ordering had to be perfectly timed to arrive exactly when they were needed during construction. As the groundbreaking ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Aminata walked across the construction site one more time. In her mind, she could already see the massive buildings that would soon rise from this land. She could picture the processing lines where farmers' rice would be transformed into premium products. She could imagine the trucks lined up to collect finished goods for distribution across Africa. But she also understood that the real work was just beginning. The next 18 months would test everything she had learned about business, leadership, and persistence. There would be unexpected problems, cost overruns, technical challenges, and probably some moments when the entire project would seem impossible. However, as she looked at the excited faces of the farmers who were still lingering at the site, taking photographs and talking animatedly about what the factory would mean for their livelihoods, Aminata felt more determined than ever. She had come too far and overcome too many obstacles to let anything stop her now. Africa's largest rice processing facility was going to be built, and it was going to transform the agricultural landscape of an entire region. 14 months after the groundbreaking ceremony, Aminata stood inside what was rapidly becoming the most advanced rice processing facility in Africa. The massive building stretched out before her like an aircraft hangar, filled with gleaming stainless steel machinery that hummed with precision engineering. Italian technicians were making final adjustments to the sorting equipment, while Thai specialists calibrated the polishing machines that would give the finished rice its perfect appearance. The construction phase had been a roller coaster of triumphs and near disasters. 3 months into the project, the foundation work had to be completely redone when engineers discovered that the soil conditions required deeper pilings than originally planned. This setback had cost $2 million and threatened to delay the entire project by 6 months. But Aminata had refused to compromise on the structural integrity of the facility. Even though the additional costs strained her budget to the breaking point, the equipment installation phase had brought its own set of challenges. When the main processing line arrived from Thailand, customs officials at the port demanded bribes that would have added $500,000 to the project cost. Instead of paying, Aminata had called Dr. Sawadogo, who arranged for President Traoré to personally intervene. The equipment was released without any additional payments, but the incident reminded everyone that corruption remained a constant threat to legitimate business operations. Now, as the facility neared completion, Aminata was dealing with the complex task of hiring and training the 3,000 workers who would operate the factory. This was perhaps the most important aspect of the entire project, because even the most advanced equipment would be useless without skilled operators who understood how to maintain consistent quality and efficiency. She had established partnerships with technical schools across West Africa to create specialized training programs for rice processing. Students learned not just how to operate the machinery, but also the science behind rice processing, understanding moisture content, grain structure, and quality standards that would allow their products to compete in international markets. The hiring process had revealed both the opportunities and challenges of doing business in Burkina Faso. On one hand, there was an abundance of motivated, intelligent people eager for good jobs with decent wages. The factory was offering salaries that were 40% higher than the average for industrial work in the region, along with health insurance and training opportunities that could lead to career advancement. On the other hand, many applicants lacked the technical skills needed for modern agricultural processing. Aminata had to create extensive training programs that started with basic literacy and numeracy, before moving on to equipment operation and quality control procedures. This was expensive and time-consuming, but she understood that investing in human capital was essential for long-term success. The female workers presented particular opportunities and challenges. In many parts of West Africa, women had traditionally been involved in rice processing, but usually through small-scale, labor-intensive methods. The factory would employ over 200 women in roles ranging from quality control inspectors to shift supervisors. Many of these women had never worked in a formal industrial setting, requiring specially designed training programs that addressed both technical skills and workplace culture. Aminata had insisted that 50% of supervisor positions be filled by women, despite resistance from some of the male engineers who claimed that women couldn't handle the technical demands of modern equipment operation. To prove them wrong, she arranged for some of her female trainees to visit rice processing facilities in Thailand and Vietnam, where they could see women successfully managing similar operations. The results were impressive. The women who received this international training returned with confidence and expertise that impressed even the skeptical male colleagues. They became advocates for other women in the organization and helped create a workplace culture that valued competence and dedication regardless of gender. As the factory neared its official opening, Aminata began receiving visitors from across Africa and around the world. Agricultural ministers from other countries came to see what Burkina Faso was building. International development organizations sent representatives to study the project as a model for similar initiatives. Business leaders from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa came to explore partnerships and licensing opportunities. One particularly significant visitor was Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the president of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. She had heard about Aminata's project through international development networks and wanted to see firsthand what was being accomplished. During her visit, she was impressed not just by the scale and technology of the facility, but by the comprehensive approach that included farmer training, quality control, and market development. "What you've built here could be replicated across Africa," Dr. Kalibata told Aminata during a private meeting. "This isn't just a rice processing facility. It's a blueprint for agricultural transformation throughout the continent." The conversation led to discussions about expanding the model to other countries. Several West African governments had already approached Aminata about building similar facilities in their territories. The success of the Burkina Faso factory was opening doors to opportunities that she had never imagined when she started the project, but Aminata remained focused on making sure her first factory succeeded before thinking about expansion. The final testing phase was critical. Every piece of equipment had to be calibrated perfectly, every process had to be refined, and every worker had to demonstrate competency in their assigned tasks. The first test run used rice from local farmers who had been waiting anxiously to see their crops processed in the new facility. As raw rice entered the cleaning stations, moved through the hulling machines, and emerged as perfectly polished, packaged products, there was a sense of magic in the air. The machines that had been shipped from halfway around the world were now transforming crops grown in the fields of Burkina Faso. Quality tests showed that the processed rice met international standards for appearance, taste, and nutritional content. More importantly, the cost per ton was significantly lower than imported rice, even after accounting for all the expenses of running such an advanced facility. This meant that local farmers could receive better prices for their crops while consumers paid less for higher quality rice. The success of the test runs attracted the attention of major retailers and distributors throughout West Africa. Orders began coming in from supermarket chains in Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Nigeria. International food aid organizations expressed interest in purchasing rice for humanitarian programs. Recognizing that locally processed rice could be delivered faster and cheaper than imports from Asia, the pre-orders were so strong that Aminata realized the factory would be operating at full capacity from the day it opened. This was both exciting and nerve-wracking. There would be no gradual ramp-up period to work out problems. Every system had to function perfectly from day one. President Traoré announced that he would personally attend the factory's grand opening ceremony, scheduled for exactly 18 months after the groundbreaking. This would be an even bigger event than the groundbreaking, with representatives from major international organizations, potential customers from across Africa, and media coverage that would showcase Burkina Faso's emergence as a leader in agricultural processing. But for Aminata, the most meaningful moment came 3 weeks before the grand opening, when her father visited the completed factory for the first time. The elderly farmer walked slowly through the processing lines, touching the machinery with wonder and asking detailed questions about how everything worked. "My daughter," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "when you were a little girl selling rice from our farm, I never imagined that one day you would build something like this. You have honored our family and our entire country, standing in the factory that represented the culmination of her life's work, surrounded by equipment that would soon be processing rice from thousands of farmers across West Africa." Aminata felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had taken the knowledge learned from her father's small farm and used it to create something that would benefit an entire region. The factory was more than just a business success. It was proof that African entrepreneurs could compete with anyone in the world when given the right support and opportunities. It demonstrated that women could lead transformational projects in industries traditionally dominated by men. Most importantly, it showed that Africa could move beyond exporting raw materials to processing its own resources and capturing the full value of its agricultural production. As the grand opening approached, Aminata began thinking about the next phase of her vision. The success of this factory had already generated interest from investors and governments across Africa. She was receiving inquiries about building similar facilities in other countries, licensing her processing techniques, and expanding into other agricultural products. But she also understood that sustainable success would require more than just building factories. It would require developing the entire agricultural value chain, helping farmers improve their cultivatio. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and bright, with perfect weather for what was being called the most significant industrial event in Burkina Faso's history. By 8 a.m., the area around the rice processing facility was buzzing with activity as dignitaries, media representatives, and business leaders from across Africa arrived for the ceremony that would officially launch Africa's largest rice processing operation. Aminata arrived at the factory at sunrise, wanting to personally check every detail one final time. She walked through the processing lines that had been polished to perfection, inspected the packaging areas where the first commercial rice would soon be prepared for shipment, and reviewed the security arrangements for the hundreds of VIP guests who would tour the facility throughout the day. The transformation of the site was remarkable. 18 months ago, this had been empty land on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Now it housed a gleaming industrial complex that covered 52 acres, employed 3,000 people, and had the capacity to process 500,000 tons of rice annually. The main processing building was the size of several football fields, while administrative offices, worker facilities, and storage areas created a small industrial city. President Traoré arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by his full cabinet and representatives from 11 African countries. The presence of so many high-level officials demonstrated the regional significance of what Aminata had accomplished. This wasn't just a business success story. It was being seen as a model for the kind of industrial development that could transform Africa's relationship with global markets. As the ceremony began, Aminata felt a mixture of pride, relief, and anticipation. Everything she had worked toward for the past decade was about to become fully operational. The risks she had taken, the obstacles she had overcome, and the years of careful planning were all leading to this moment when her vision would finally be complete. The opening ceremony featured speeches from multiple dignitaries, but the most powerful moment came when President Traoré announced that the facility would be granted special status as a strategic national asset. This designation provided additional legal protections and government support, ensuring that the factory would be protected from any future attempts at interference or obstruction. Today marks a turning point not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa, President Traoré declared to the assembled crowd of over 3,000 people. Aminata Kone has shown us what is possible when African entrepreneurs are given the support they need to think big and build boldly. This factory will feed families, create prosperity, and demonstrate to the world that Africa is ready to lead in global agricultural markets. When Aminata was invited to speak, she used the opportunity to recognize all the people who had made the factory possible. She thanked the farmers who had trusted her with their crops, the workers who had learned new skills to operate advanced equipment, the investors who had believed in her vision, and the government officials who had provided crucial support at critical moments. But her most emotional recognition went to the women who had overcome cultural barriers to join the industrial workforce. 50 years ago, my grandmother processed rice by hand, one grain at a time, Aminata said. Today, her granddaughter operates the most advanced rice processing facility in Africa, and over 200 women work alongside me as equals in positions of responsibility and leadership. That is the kind of progress that makes all our hard work worthwhile. The official ribbon cutting was conducted with a ceremonial pair of golden scissors, as photographers from across Africa documented the historic moment. As the ribbon fell away, the first commercial shipment of rice began moving through the processing lines, with guests able to watch the entire operation from observation decks that had been specially designed for tours and educational visits. The quality of the processed rice impressed even the most skeptical observers. International food experts who had come to evaluate the facility's output confirmed that the products met or exceeded global standards for premium rice. The combination of high-quality local crops, advanced processing technology, and rigorous quality control had produced results that could compete with the best rice from anywhere in the world. Orders were already pouring in from customers across West Africa and beyond. A major South African supermarket chain had committed to purchasing 10,000 tons annually. International food aid organizations had signed contracts for emergency relief supplies. Even restaurants in Europe were expressing interest in African processed rice for specialty dishes. The economic impact was already being felt throughout the region. Farmers who had previously struggled to get fair prices for their crops were now receiving payments that were 30% higher than traditional markets. The factory's demand for raw materials was so strong that many farmers were expanding their operations and investing in improved cultivation techniques. But perhaps the most significant impact was on young people throughout Africa who saw Aminata's success as proof that their own big dreams were achievable. Applications to engineering and business schools across the continent had increased dramatically, with many students citing the rice factory project as inspiration for their career choices. Young women in particular were pursuing technical education in unprecedented numbers. As the opening ceremony concluded and the factory officially began commercial operations, Aminata was already receiving requests for meetings from government representatives and investors interested in replicating the project in other countries. The success of the Burkina Faso facility had generated demand for similar operations throughout Africa and even in other developing regions around the world. 6 months later, the factory was operating at full capacity and had exceeded all projected performance targets. Production efficiency was 12% higher than originally planned, while operating costs were 8% lower than budgeted. The facility had become profitable faster than any comparable agricultural processing operation in Africa. More importantly, the broader economic impact was transforming the agricultural sector throughout West Africa. Farmer incomes in the region had increased by an average of 25%, while food security had improved dramatically as local rice production displaced expensive imports. The success had inspired similar projects in Ghana, Mali, and Ivory Coast, creating a network of modern processing facilities that was revolutionizing African agriculture. International recognition followed quickly. Aminata was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, where she shared her insights about building transformational businesses in developing countries. Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Harvard Business School developed a case study about her project that was taught in universities across 6 continents. But for Aminata, the most meaningful recognition came from the farmers and workers whose lives had been transformed by the opportunities created by the factory. When she walked through the processing lines and saw people who had once struggled with poverty, now earning good wages and building better futures for their families, she knew that all the challenges and sacrifices had been worthwhile. Standing in her office overlooking the bustling factory floor, Aminata could see trucks lined up to deliver raw rice from across West Africa, while other trucks loaded with finished products prepared to carry premium rice to markets throughout the continent. The vision that had started in her kitchen 20 years ago had become a reality that was changing lives across an entire region. The little girl from Bobo Dioulasso, who had once sold rice door-to-door in Ouagadougou, had become the CEO of Africa's largest rice processing operation, proving that with determination, intelligence, and the right support, even the most ambitious dreams could become reality. Her success had stunned President Traoré and impressed the world, but most importantly, it had created a foundation for sustainable prosperity that would benefit generations of African farmers and families for decades to come.